Welcome to the Midnight Codex, where forgotten truths breathe and shadows tell their tale. Tonight, don't blink and don't look behind you.
I need to write this down. Maybe someone will believe me. But even I'm not sure if I believe it myself anymore. I've seen things that should never have been seen. And now, the Vatican's secrets are waking up, and I'm the one who's going to pay for it. I sit here, at the edge of my bed, the lamp casting long shadows on the floor. The air feels thick tonight, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath, waiting for something to happen, for something to shift. I feel the weight of failure in my bones, a gnawing sensation that's become all too familiar. My name is Michael Hawke. Not long ago, I was an up-and-coming historian with a promising future. I had the world at my feet until I decided to challenge the Vatican. The Church didn't take kindly to that. What started as an innocent inquiry into the history of the Vatican's archives, questioning some long-established truths, soon spiraled into something more dangerous. It wasn't just about history anymore. It was about power, control. And the Vatican had a vested interest in keeping its secrets hidden. They branded me a heretic, a conspiracy theorist, a danger to the Church's carefully crafted image. I lost my position. My reputation was tarnished beyond repair. No one would listen to me. No one would give me a chance. All I had was my passion for the truth. But the truth, well, that's a dangerous thing when you start digging too deep. I was no longer welcome in the academic world. Every door slammed shut, every phone call unanswered. But the silence was worse than the rejection. It was as if the world had decided that I never existed. No one spoke my name anymore. I was a ghost. Until one night. I remember it vividly. Sitting at my desk, the hum of the city outside the window, the flicker of the lamp casting an almost eerie glow across the pages of my research. I had long since given up on sleep, lost in thoughts of ancient texts, forgotten rituals, and the dark knowledge hidden within the Vatican's walls. And that's when it came. The email. It was simple. No subject, no signature. Just a cold, calculated message. You are the one we seek. Your knowledge can either redeem you or destroy you. The Vatican holds secrets so ancient, their knowledge will change the course of history. You have been chosen to uncover them. But be warned, the price of your discovery will be more than you can bear. At first, I thought it was a prank. A cruel joke, maybe from one of my former colleagues who still found amusement in my downfall. But as I stared at the screen, the words started to sink in, each letter pressing against my chest like a weight. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't some petty act of revenge. This was something real. Something ancient. I could feel my heart begin to race as my fingers hovered over the keyboard. Could it be true? Could the Vatican really be hiding something that powerful, something so dangerous that they'd go to such lengths to silence anyone who dared to question them? This wasn't just about history anymore. This was about something far darker, something that had been buried for centuries, sealed away beneath the very heart of the Church. I knew what I had to do. I had to find out. But deep down, I could feel the pull of dread creeping along the edges of my thoughts. I knew there was a price to be paid. I had been warned. But curiosity, ambition, or perhaps the remnants of my old self, pushed me forward. I packed my things without hesitation. I didn't care anymore about the risks. The opportunity was too great. The chance to uncover the truth, to reveal the Vatican's darkest secrets to the world, was something I could never turn down. The next morning, I boarded the train to Vatican City. Rome, the eternal city, always felt alive with history. It wasn't just a place, it was a living testament to the passage of time. As the train rolled through the winding streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was a quiet day, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the ancient buildings. The air was crisp, but there was an undeniable tension in the atmosphere. It felt heavy. I walked towards the Vatican, past the crowds of tourists milling around St. Peter's Square. The usual chatter, the hum of excitement, was gone. The place seemed strangely empty, the buildings looming like silent sentinels, watching, waiting. I knew I was getting closer to something dangerous, something I wasn't prepared for. I arrived at the side entrance of St. Peter's Basilica. It was a door I had seen countless times but never paid much attention to. Today, though, it felt like the threshold to a different world. I knocked, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open slowly, and I stepped inside. The interior of the Vatican archives was nothing like I had imagined. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. The shelves stretched upwards, filled with countless books, ancient texts, and relics that had not seen the light of day for centuries. The silence in the room was suffocating. It was as if the very air held its breath, waiting for something to happen. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Tall, thin, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. He didn't speak at first. He simply motioned for me to follow him. "Father Dario," he said, his voice cold and formal, as he led me deeper into the archives. His footsteps echoed in the vast, empty space. I followed him, my heart racing, my mind spinning with questions. What was this place? Why had they brought me here? We reached a small, dimly lit room. There, Father Dario handed me a thick, leather-bound book. The cover was adorned with strange, ancient symbols, symbols I recognized from my studies, but had never seen this clearly before. The book felt heavy in my hands, as if it contained more than just words. It held a power, an energy that made my skin crawl. "This is what you sought," Father Dario said, his voice low, almost reverent. "But be warned, the knowledge contained within these pages is not for the faint-hearted. What you uncover here will change you. It will change everything." He stepped back, his eyes never leaving mine. "But remember the rules." I nodded, my mind racing. "Rules? Do not disturb the tomes until the appointed hour," he said, his voice a whisper. "Never ask questions, never look into the mirrors, and above all, do not allow the book's seal to be broken. If you do, there is no going back." I opened the book, and immediately the temperature in the room dropped. A sudden chill ran down my spine. I could feel the shadows gathering in the corners of the room, watching me. The symbols on the page began to shift, twisting and turning as if they were alive. Father Dario's warning echoed in my ears, but it was too late. The moment I touched the page, I felt the first stirrings of something ancient, something powerful, and with that, the darkness began to awaken. I should have listened to Father Dario's warnings, but it was too late now. I had already crossed the line. I had opened the door to the Vatican's darkest secret, and I was about to pay the price. The Vatican archives were a world of their own, hidden beneath the surface of the city, a labyrinth of forgotten rooms, fragile parchments, and long-forgotten tomes. As I walked deeper into its depths, I felt as if I were stepping into another time, another realm entirely. The air was thick with dust and history, the kind of air that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The silence here was absolute, heavy like a shroud, and every footstep echoed through the stone hallways, amplifying the eerie stillness. Father Dario walked ahead of me, his every step deliberate, his movements controlled. He was an older man, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a quiet intensity that belied his age. His face, lined with the wear of countless years, seemed to be carved from the same stone as the walls around us. As we moved deeper into the archive, I couldn't help but notice how the darkness grew thicker, as though it were slowly encroaching on us, drawing us into its fold. We passed rows of shelves that reached high into the ceiling, each one crammed with dusty books and ancient relics, all whispering their forgotten stories. I couldn't help but feel that these were not merely books, but relics of a time when knowledge was considered sacred, so sacred, in fact, that it had been hidden away from the world. I had long suspected that the Vatican held secrets, but standing here, surrounded by them, I felt a strange sense of unease. We finally arrived at a small, dimly lit room at the far end of the hall. The room was colder than the others, the temperature dropping noticeably as we stepped inside. At the center of the room stood a large pedestal, upon which sat a massive tome, its cover made of dark, cracked leather. Strange symbols were etched into the surface, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with a life of their own. The book was massive, its pages yellowed with age, and the very sight of it made my pulse quicken. Father Dario turned to me, his face grave. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The truth you seek lies within. But first, you must understand the rules." I blinked, momentarily confused. "Rules?" Father Dario's gaze was steady, unwavering. "These are not mere suggestions. They are the only protection you have." I didn't say anything, but I felt a chill creep up my spine. The book before me seemed to beckon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was alive in a way I couldn't understand. "Rule 1, Father Dario began, his voice dropping lower, almost as if afraid of the words he was about to speak. "Do not open the tome without speaking the incantation first." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "An incantation?" "Yes," he said, nodding slowly. "This book is not like any ordinary text. It is a doorway, a gate to a place you cannot imagine. The incantation will unlock its contents. Without it, you risk awakening something you cannot control." I couldn't suppress a nervous laugh. It all sounded so mythical, superstitious. But Father Dario's eyes were dead serious. "Rule 2, he continued, ignoring my reaction. "If the candles flicker, do not leave the room." I looked around, noticing the faint flicker of the candle flames in the room. They were small, weak flames, casting erratic shadows across the walls. I opened my mouth to question him, but he raised a hand to stop me. "When the candles flicker, it is a sign," he explained. "A sign that something is stirring. The presence in this room is not a quiet one. If you leave, if you try to escape before the time is right, you will break the balance. Stay. Stay in the room and do not leave." I scoffed quietly. "I thought this was about knowledge, not superstition." Father Dario's eyes darkened. "Do not mistake caution for superstition, Michael. There is much here that is beyond your understanding." The air grew heavier as Father Dario moved on, and the shadows seemed to deepen around me. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as he spoke the third rule. "Never look directly at the shadowed figure in the mirror." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Mirror?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I glanced around, but there was no mirror in sight. Only the shadows seemed to stretch farther into the corners of the room. Father Dario gestured vaguely to a dark corner. "It will appear when the time is right. The mirror will show you a figure, one that is not of this world. If you look at it directly, you will lose yourself." I shook my head, the skeptic in me rising. "You expect me to believe that? A shadowy figure?" "I have seen it myself." Father Dario's voice was firm, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me falter. "Those who look are never the same again. They become part of the ritual. They are lost to the shadows." The absurdity of the situation was not lost on me, but there was a part of me, a nagging part, that wanted to believe him, that feared the consequences of ignoring his warnings. "Rule 4, he said, his tone growing even more serious. "Do not ask questions. The answers will come when the time is right." I frowned. What does that mean? How am I supposed to understand anything if I can't ask questions? Father Dario's face softened slightly. "The truth cannot be rushed, Michael. You must wait. The answers will come when you are ready. If you push too hard, if you demand answers before you are ready, you will only bring chaos." A cold shiver ran down my spine. His words were starting to feel less like advice and more like a warning of something much greater than I could possibly comprehend. Finally, Father Dario spoke the last rule. It was the one that sent a chill straight to my core. "Leave before dawn, or risk becoming part of the ritual." I stared at him, wide-eyed. "What do you mean, part of the ritual?" "Those who stay beyond the first light of day become part of the ritual. They are consumed. Do not test the boundaries, Michael. Leave before the first rays of the sun touch this place." I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the unsettling weight of his words. But the flickering candlelight seemed to dim, the shadows growing longer and deeper. My heart pounded in my chest. Something in the room shifted. Something was waiting. I tried to laugh it off, but I could feel it now, the presence in the room, watching me. It was subtle at first, just a sense of being observed, but the longer I stood there, the more tangible it became. The book on the pedestal seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as if it were alive, watching, waiting. Father Dario's eyes never left mine. You think these rules are just superstition, that they are some form of control, but I've seen the truth, Michael. I've seen what happens when the rules are broken. I took a step back, my mind racing. And what happens then? Do not break the rules, he said, his voice steady, or you will see for yourself. The chamber beneath the Vatican felt as though it existed outside of time, its very air thick with centuries of secrets that had been hidden away from the world. The walls, etched with cryptic symbols, seemed to pulse with life, their strange markings shifting and changing in the flickering candlelight. It was as if the room itself was breathing, alive with something ancient, something dark. I could feel the weight of it pressing in on me, suffocating me, as I stepped deeper into the shadows of the chamber. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, sharp and cloying, mingling with the musty earthen smell of long-forgotten tomes and ancient relics. It seemed to suffocate the senses, dulling the sharp edge of rational thought and leaving me with only a primal awareness, an awareness of the power that filled the room, of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface. Father Dario stood at the far side of the chamber, his back turned to me, a figure lost in his own thoughts. The shadows gathered around him, wrapping themselves like a shroud. The pedestal that held the tome gleamed faintly in the dim light, and the book, the key, seemed to call to me. I approached the pedestal with slow, measured steps, my fingers trembling as I reached out toward the tome. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, and as my fingers brushed the surface of the leather-bound book, a wave of cold washed over me. It wasn't a cold that made me shiver. It was deeper, a bone-chilling cold that sank into my soul, as if the room itself was rejecting me. Father Dario's voice broke through the silence, low and steady. "Remember the rules, Michael," he said, his tone laced with an intensity I hadn't heard before. "Do not open it without the incantation." But I was already beyond the point of turning back. I ignored his words, the ancient warnings echoing in my mind like the howling wind of a coming storm. My hand hovered over the book, and I could almost feel the power radiating from its pages. The symbols on the cover seemed to shift beneath my touch, drawing me in deeper. The incantation was meant to unlock something, I realized, but I didn't need it. Not now. Not when the answers I sought were so close. Without thinking, I opened the book. Immediately, the temperature in the room dropped and my breath fogged in front of me. It wasn't just the cold that unsettled me. It was the weight, the sheer heaviness of the air, as though something ancient and malevolent was pressing against me from all sides. The room seemed to shrink, its walls closing in, and I felt a rising panic, a sense that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The candlelight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath now, thick and visible in the frigid air. The book's pages seemed to come alive under my fingers, the text shifting before my eyes, the words twisting into shapes I couldn't understand. And then I heard it. A whisper, low and guttural, coming from the mirrors that lined the walls. I glanced toward them, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement. But when I looked closer, there was nothing, only the still black surface of the glass. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back to the book, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. The air was thick with presence, something dark and hungry, as though the room itself had woken up, and it was waiting. I forced myself to read, to focus on the symbols in front of me, but the words seemed to blur, twisting and shifting in ways that defied logic. The book was no longer a simple text. It was a door, a gate to something ancient and powerful. As I read, I felt the ground beneath my feet tremble, the very air warping around me, bending to the will of the ritual that had been set in motion. And then it hit me. The Vatican had been guarding this tome, this key to an ancient doorway, a doorway to a realm of darkness, one that had been sealed away for centuries. The text described a force, an evil force, that had been trapped behind that doorway, bound by the church for as long as anyone could remember. But the seal was weakening, the tomb was open, and that force was waking up. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. The knowledge I had sought, the forbidden truths hidden for so long, was not something I could control. It wasn't a truth meant for the living. It was an ancient evil, a power too great to be contained. And it was awakening. The room grew colder still, and the shadows began to twist in ways that were no longer natural. The figures in the mirrors started to take shape, becoming clearer, more distinct. They were no longer just reflections. They were moving, stepping out from the glass. And their eyes glowed with an unnatural, otherworldly light. "It's too late," the voice whispered, echoing in my mind. "You've awakened us. We are free." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The mirror figures were closing in, their faces becoming clearer and clearer with each passing second. I could feel their gaze, cold and piercing, as though they were searching my soul. But it wasn't just them. The shadows on the walls began to stretch, twisting and bending unnaturally. The room was no longer a room. It had become a portal, a doorway to something far darker than I could have imagined. And then I saw it. A figure stepped out of the mirror, its form tall and menacing, its eyes glowing with that same eerie light. It moved slowly at first, as if savoring my fear, but then it lunged. Its form was not fully human, not fully corporeal. It was an amalgamation of shadow and substance, a creature born of darkness. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash, the sound of metal on stone reverberating through the chamber. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I tried to push against it, but the door didn't budge. It was as if the very room had turned against me, trapping me in its grasp. I looked around, desperate for an escape, but the shadows were closing in. The figures from the mirror were advancing, their eyes glowing brighter with every step. The air felt suffocating, thick with the presence of something other. The darkness had a weight to it, a pressure that made it impossible to breathe. The figure that had stepped from the mirror was now standing before me, its face obscured by shadows. But I could feel its eyes on me, burning into my soul, and I knew that it was not alone. The presence of the ancient evil was everywhere now. It had been released, and there was no going back. My body moved on instinct, my heart racing as I tried to force myself toward the door. I pulled at it with all my strength, but the door remained shut. The shadows seemed to have grown longer, more solid, as if they were reaching for me, closing in on all sides. The figure raised its hand and the room seemed to tremble. A voice, low and hollow, whispered, "You've awoken us, Michael, and now you belong to us." I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at the figure, its glowing eyes burning into mine. And then, as I felt the cold hands of darkness begin to close around me, I realized there was no escape. The Vatican, once a symbol of purity, peace, and reverence, had transformed into something unrecognizable. It was no longer a place of light, but a prison of terror, a nightmare wrapped in centuries of deception. The familiar architecture, the grand columns, the majestic halls, all of it now felt suffocating, oppressive. I couldn't tell where the shadows ended and the walls began. The very air felt wrong, as if reality itself was being bent, twisted into something unholy. The shadows, once mere figures cast by light, now bled from the stone. They crawled along the walls like living things, reaching out for me, clawing at my consciousness. The flickering lights, the faint hum of the Vatican's power, all seemed to pulse in rhythm with the darkness that had taken root. It was as if the Vatican, a place I had revered my entire life, had become alive with malevolent intent. Time itself had become a fluid concept. I couldn't trust it. Hours, days, or minutes, everything bled together into a haze. The clock on the wall ticked erratically, its second hand moving forward and backward as if trapped in a loop, mocking my every attempt to grasp the passage of time. The cold was unbearable, crawling beneath my skin, seeping into my bones. But it wasn't just the cold that unsettled me. It was the feeling that something had changed within me, something I could no longer control. I staggered through the halls, my steps heavy, my mind fogged. The walls around me seemed to shift, their once solid surfaces now rippling like water. Each corner I turned led me deeper into the heart of the Vatican, deeper into its labyrinth of secrets. The faces of saints and popes painted onto the walls seemed to watch me with accusatory eyes. Their painted gazes followed my every movement, and I couldn't escape them. The darkness was everywhere, suffocating me. And then the visions started. At first they were subtle, just fleeting glimpses of something at the corner of my vision. A figure in a dark robe standing in the shadows. A flash of strange symbols, their meanings just beyond my reach. But then they grew more intense, more vivid. The very air seemed to shimmer with these distorted images, and I couldn't tell where the present ended and the past began. I was no longer walking through the Vatican as I knew it. I was standing in the midst of a different time, a different reality. The ancient halls were filled with robed figures, their faces obscured by their hoods. They moved with purpose, chanting in a language I could not understand. They were performing a ritual, one I couldn't quite grasp, but I knew enough to understand its significance. The walls, the very stones beneath my feet, had been built to contain something dark, something ancient. The figures were chanting, their voices rising in unison, and I could see it, the seal they had created. It was a seal that held something back, something far worse than I could have ever imagined. The very air hummed with power, an energy that threatened to consume everything. I could feel the evil pressing against the barrier, clawing at the edges, waiting for the moment it would be free. And then I saw Father Dario. He wasn't the man I had come to know. His face was young, his eyes sharp, and filled with an intensity that matched the ritual unfolding before me. But it was his actions that haunted me. He wasn't just a priest. He was the guardian, the one who had kept the evil sealed, the one who had sworn to protect the Vatican's darkest secret. The vision blurred, and suddenly I was back in the present, standing in the middle of a hallway, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. But the image of Father Dario lingered in my mind, his eyes burning with the weight of centuries. I couldn't deny it anymore. The evil had always been here. It had never truly been contained. And now I had broken the seal. A cold laughter echoed in my ears. It was low, guttural, coming from the depths of the darkness itself. You are the one. You were chosen to break the seal. You have opened the door. I spun around, my heart thundering in my chest, but there was no one there, only the shadows stretching across the walls, swirling like an angry storm. The air was thick with malice, and I could feel it. It was coming for me. Father Dario's voice broke through the madness, low and steady, though there was no warmth left in it. "Michael," he said, his tone calm but filled with a dark resolve, "you've done it. You've set it free. Now you must make a choice." I turned to face him, the confusion, the fear, all twisting together inside of me. "What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What choice? You brought me here. You brought me into this." Father Dario stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. There was something different about him now, something ancient and far older than the man I had first met. His face was etched with centuries of pain, of knowledge too terrible to bear. "I was chosen long ago, Michael," he said softly. "I was meant to guard the seal, to ensure that the evil remained locked away. But I failed." He looked at the shadows, his gaze distant, as if seeing something beyond the room, beyond the time. "You were always meant to break it. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. You were chosen to open the tomb." I recoiled, my mind struggling to process the enormity of his words. I was chosen. I had no idea what I was doing. I just wanted to know the truth. I thought I could control it. Father Dario's face softened. but his eyes held a grave sorrow. No one can control it, Michael. Not you, not me, not anyone. The evil was never meant to be understood. It was never meant to be touched. He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. But now that it's awake, there's only one choice left. You must decide. Will you become the vessel for this evil, or will you seal it away again? I took a step back, my breath ragged. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the shadows, those damn shadows, seemed to pulse with life, drawing closer with each passing second. I can't, I whispered, shaking my head. I can't be the one to carry it. I can't be the one to— You don't have a choice, Father Dario interrupted, his voice harsh, but there was an understanding in it. You've already opened the door, and now it will come for you. You can either choose to carry it, or you can try to fight it. But the darkness is not something that can be destroyed, Michael. It only grows stronger. And then, before I could respond, the room exploded into chaos. A horde of shadowy figures rushed from the corners of the room, their forms twisted, unnatural, moving with a speed that defied all logic. Their eyes burned with an unholy fire, and their bodies were made of nothing but darkness, a void that consumed everything it touched. I turned to run, but the shadows closed in, surrounding me from every side, their cold hands reaching for me, pulling me toward the center of the room. Father Dario stepped back, his voice rising in a chant, an ancient forgotten language that seemed to reverberate in my skull. The walls shook, the floor trembled beneath my feet, and the shadows grew thicker, more aggressive. "Michael!" Father Dario shouted, his voice barely audible over the sound of the chanting. "Make your choice, now!" But there was no time. The shadows were upon me, their cold touch burning through my skin, and the last thing I saw before the world collapsed into darkness was Father Dario's face, his eyes filled with regret. The shadows closed in, suffocating me, and the last thing I heard was the final syllable of the chant echoing in my mind. The room was consumed by darkness, and I was left with only one thought. Had I sealed the evil once again, or had I doomed us all? The catacombs beneath Vatican City were a place of darkness, but not the peaceful darkness of rest. Number. This darkness was alive. It had a pulse. It throbbed. It twisted and squeezed the very air out of me, pressing down until I could hardly breathe. The walls, once solemn, once a hallowed space for the dead, now seemed like living creatures. The ancient stone, damp and cold, hummed beneath my touch. Each step I took through these cursed halls was a step deeper into a nightmare I could neither escape nor understand. My feet dragged with every movement, as though the catacombs themselves were pulling me down. The voices that had whispered to me earlier grew louder, more urgent. Their words were no longer just tempting suggestions. They were demands. They were promises. "Power," they hissed. "You are destined for greatness, Michael. All you have to do is accept it. You've already come so far." I tried to shut them out, tried to focus on the path ahead, but it felt impossible. The darkness pressed in on me from all sides. My own mind began to betray me, each flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, each whisper in my ear, a reminder that I was no longer alone in my thoughts. I was not in control anymore. The cold became unbearable, my breath fogging in the air, sharp and slow. I could feel it inside me. Something was changing, like an infection spreading through my body, creeping up from my toes to my fingertips. The stone walls began to close in around me, and with every breath, the space grew smaller. The deeper I went into the catacombs, the further I slipped from the reality I once knew. It was as though the very fabric of the world had begun to unravel. Time no longer made sense. It stretched and warped, pulling me along a path that had no end. The voices grew louder, louder still, until they were all I could hear. Their promises were seductive: power, control, immortality. They spoke of things I had once dreamed of, things I thought I could never possess. And it was so tempting, so easy to listen. But even as the words filled my mind, I couldn't shake the growing horror creeping in around the edges of my thoughts. This wasn't just about power. This was about something else, something that had been sealed away, locked in the very depths of the earth for a reason. I shook my head, trying to focus. Number, I can't give in. I can't. But the more I resisted, the harder it became. The shadows seemed to creep closer, pressing against my skin, drawing me in. The deeper I went, the more I felt the pull. There was no escape. Not anymore. I was bound to this place, bound to this ritual, and the choice was no longer mine to make. I reached the final stretch of the catacombs, my legs heavy, my mind a jumbled mess of fragmented thoughts. The temperature had dropped so drastically that my fingers were numb, but the cold wasn't what terrified me. No, it was the weight that settled over me, thick and suffocating. The final chamber was ahead, its massive sealed doors looming like the mouth of a Sheti, great beast, waiting to consume me. The walls of the catacombs seemed to groan as I approached the chamber. The shadows were darker here, thicker. I could feel them closing in around me. I was not alone. I tried to move faster to get to the doors, but something stopped me. A cold gust of wind surged through the hall, sending a chill that cut through my bones. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to echo from every corner. "You are so close, Michael." I gritted my teeth and clenched my fists. I can't do this. I can't give in. But it was too late. The power was already inside me, gnawing at the edges of my soul. I'd been marked. I'd been chosen. And now there was no going back. I reached out for the doors, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold, jagged surface of the stone. The moment my hand made contact, a wave of energy surged through me, coursing through my veins like fire. The walls of the chamber trembled, as if the very foundation of the catacombs was shaking under the weight of what had been unleashed. And then the doors began to creak open. A heavy silence followed, the kind of silence that precedes the storm. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in the stillness. I could feel it, the presence. The ancient evil was awakening, and it was calling to me. I stepped forward, my legs unsteady, my breath shallow. The darkness inside the chamber seemed to reach out to me, to swallow me whole. And just as I crossed the threshold, the whispers returned, louder than ever, surrounding me, drowning out my thoughts. "You've awakened us, Michael. Now you will serve us." I could feel the presence inside me, twisting my thoughts, making my vision blur. It was as if I were no longer in control of my own body. The shadows grew thicker, darker, wrapping around my limbs, pulling me deeper into the chamber. And then, in the center of the room, I saw it. A figure, tall and cloaked in shadow. Its face was obscured, but its eyes, they were like burning coals, glowing with an otherworldly fire. It stepped forward, its movement smooth, graceful, like a predator closing in on its prey. I froze, my heart caught in my throat. The figure raised its hand, and the temperature in the room plummeted even further until I could feel the very marrow in my bones freezing. "You've come so far, Michael. Now you must choose. Will you be the vessel, or will you try to stop us?" The figure's voice was like a rumble in the earth, deep and unsettling, carrying a weight that pressed down on me, forcing me to kneel before it. The shadows writhed around me, their tendrils curling around my body, pulling me down, forcing me into submission. I could feel it, the evil, the darkness, coursing through my veins, urging me to give in, to embrace the power that was being offered. The temptation was overwhelming. It was everything I had ever wanted. But a part of me still resisted, still fought, against it. The echoes of the world I had known, the world I had left behind, flickered in my mind like fading embers. Father Dario's words echoed in my head. "You must choose, Michael. You were chosen." The figure before me took another step closer, its presence suffocating. "Choose," it whispered again. "You have no other choice." I wanted to scream, to shout, to do anything to push this evil away, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The shadows pressed in around me, suffocating me, drowning me in their cold embrace. And then I felt it. The darkness had fully consumed me. The figure stepped closer, its eyes burning into mine. The shadows began to take shape, surrounding me, pulling me deeper into the heart of the evil. And in that moment, I realized I had already made my choice. But what would it cost me? The heart of the Vatican had never been this silent. A stillness hung in the air, so thick and oppressive that even the light seemed reluctant to break through. The towering columns of the basilica loomed overhead, their shadows stretching unnaturally long across the marble floor. It was as if the very walls of the Vatican had been swallowed by the darkness, standing as silent witnesses to the world's final reckoning. The battle between light and shadow, ancient and modern, had arrived at its bitter climax. The once hallowed grounds of the Vatican now felt like a battlefield, a place where the forces of good and evil were preparing for the ultimate confrontation. I stood at the edge of the ritual chamber, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with anticipation. The shadows had already begun to creep into every corner of the room, swirling around the altar like hungry predators, while the flickering candlelight offered a faint, almost pathetic resistance. The rituals that had been set in motion days ago were coming to their inevitable conclusion, and I, Michael Hawke, was caught at the center of it all. Father Dario stood beside me, his face pale, but his eyes filled with determination. He had been my guide through this twisted journey, but now he seemed like a man trapped in his own web, bound to the very evil he had sworn to contain. The choices that had once seemed distant, abstract, were now clear before me, and they were terrifying. The door that had once been sealed, the gateway to the ancient evil, stood before me, just beyond the altar. The whispers that had tormented me since I first set foot in the Vatican had grown louder, more insistent, now filling my mind with promises I couldn't ignore. You've come so far, Michael. You have the power now. You were always meant to control it. Open the door fully, embrace the darkness, and you will become a god. I could feel the power, its pull growing stronger with each passing moment. I had already opened the door, broken the seal, and released the evil trapped within. But the ritual was not yet complete, and the choice was mine to make. The price was high, too high, but the power it promised was within reach. All I had to do was open the door fully, embrace the evil, and become its vessel. I could feel the temptation, like a snake coiling around my thoughts, urging me to give in, to claim the power that was waiting for me. But then there was Father Dario, his voice cutting through the whispers in my mind. You don't understand, Michael, he said, his voice shaking slightly. This isn't just about you. If you complete the ritual, if you embrace this power, it will consume everything. Not just you, not just me, but the entire world. The Vatican will fall, and the darkness will spread. You can't just seal it away. You can't control it. It's too late for that. I turned to him, the weight of his words sinking deep into my bones. I had seen the truth in his eyes earlier. Father Dario was no longer the man I had trusted. He was part of this ritual, bound by it, just as I was. But he was also telling me the truth. The evil I had released was far beyond anything I could control. The altar before me began to glow faintly, the symbols etched into its surface, pulsing with an otherworldly light. The shadows around me seemed to writhe and stretch, as if they were alive, waiting for the final command. The voices in my head grew louder, and I could feel the darkness pressing against me, urging me to make my choice. Open the door completely. Embrace your fate. Become one with the power. But then I thought about what Father Dario had said, about the cost of this choice, about what would happen if I gave in to the temptation. I'd come to the Vatican seeking knowledge, seeking the truth. But now I realized that some truths were better left buried. The power that the ritual offered was not worth the price. No power was worth the destruction of everything I had known, everything I had ever cared about. I stepped toward the altar, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the final seal, the last barrier between the world of the living and the darkness beyond. I could feel the heat from the altar, the power radiating off it, urging me to complete the ritual, to break the seal once and for all. But I knew what that would mean. It would mean the end, not just for me, but for everything. I turned to Father Dario. "I'm going to stop it," I said, my voice trembling with determination. "I'm going to seal it away." His eyes flickered with something unreadable, but he didn't protest. He didn't try to stop me. Instead, he stepped back, his face resigned, as if he had known this moment would come. "You're making the right choice," he whispered, though there was no certainty in his voice. "But remember, Michael, there's no going back. Once you seal the door, you'll be trapped. You'll be locked inside with it." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The darkness swirled around me, but I didn't flinch. I had made my choice. I reached out, my fingers brushing the seal. The moment I made contact, the room seemed to shudder. The shadows recoiled as if protesting, but I pushed forward. The symbols on the altar flared with a blinding light, and I could feel the power of the ritual pulling at me, trying to drag me back, trying to force me to embrace it, but I wouldn't be swayed. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to let it consume me. With a final desperate push, I pressed the seal into place. The room erupted in a violent surge of energy, the force of it knocking me off my feet. The shadows writhed and screamed, their cries echoing through the chamber like the voices of the damned. I could feel the walls of the Vatican shaking, as if they were about to collapse under the weight of the evil I had just sealed away. But it was done. I had stopped it. The door was sealed. The ritual was over. I lay on the cold stone floor, gasping for breath, my body aching from the force of the ritual. I could hear Father Dario approaching, his footsteps slow, measured. He didn't speak, but I could hear the weight of his thoughts in the silence. Finally, he knelt beside me, his face solemn. "You did it," he said softly. "You stopped it." But as I looked at him, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, something different. His eyes were darker now, filled with something other than the man I had first met. There was something in him that had changed, something that couldn't be undone. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. My throat was dry, my body weak, and I couldn't find the strength to say what I wanted to. And then, from the shadows, came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, purposeful. My heart skipped a beat as I turned toward the source of the sound. The doors to the chamber creaked open one final time, and a monstrous figure stepped through, its eyes glowing with an unearthly light. The figure was massive, towering over me, its body cloaked in darkness. The air around it crackled with power, and I knew in that moment, in the pit of my stomach, that the nightmare was far from over. I had sealed the door, but I hadn't stopped it. I had only delayed the inevitable.